Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to a presentation by the Boulder chapter of the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. We've shared this event across all the chapters, and we welcome anybody that's from out of town or anybody that's in Boulder. And I would like to go ahead and move through a little bit of housekeeping that we do right at the beginning of all our presentations. Beginning with the agenda for tonight, we will be, I'll make the introductory information just as quick as possible and move right along to hearing from Keith. And that'll be followed by Q&A. He's okay with taking a few questions on the fly. If I can interrupt him, I will with questions on the fly if it pertains to a particular slide. Otherwise, we'll pretty much just do Q&A at the end. And we conclude at 8:30 or possibly a little before. I always include a little bit of information about joining CRES as a member. We really appreciate anybody who becomes a member of CRES. It really helps us keep this really wonderful organization alive. Consider it joining as an individual. There's an introductory rate as a business member, and all the information can be found under our website. And you just go to the website and choose join, and you can get some additional information there. And if you would like to be involved with the Boulder chapter, we've been doing a lot of remote webinars and so forth, because getting folks back into the auditorium at the SEEK facility at CU was a little challenging. So we've been doing the webinars, rather than in-person events. But if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about the chapter, please reach out to Steve Whitaker. And we've got some information here in the slides. And by the way, this video of this presentation will be emailed to everyone that registered tomorrow. So if you missed something, don't worry, I'll be sending that back out tomorrow, a link to the video, and you can look at any information that you need. If you're interested in other events at CRES, we've got on the 27th, NCRES, our Northern chapter, has CSU talking about their energy and sustainability programs and what they're doing. That's one event that we've got going on later this month. Check the events page if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about what we've got coming up. And by the way, all these QR codes are included in one slide at the end, but if you're interested in seeing past videos, this video will be posted on our YouTube channel as well. You can use the QR code pictured here and check out our video library, which is quite extensive at this point. Our policy committee is an active and very effective committee, and I'd like to talk about them for just a minute to give them a shout out. We're all volunteers here at CRES, and the policy committee works really hard during the legislative session, and we've got the legislative tracker, which I'm showing here, which was up to date last month. So they try to keep this up to date. It lets everybody know what CRES is supporting, maybe opposing. Very good work by a lot of dedicated professionals on our policy committee. And if you're interested in more information about policy, you can reach out. We'll be glad to give you more information about it. If you're interested in being part of the policy committee, I can put you in touch with the folks that do run that part of our organization. If you're interested in a little bit of detail about the background of CRES, you can visit this slide again. We're very proud of our organization being quite sound. We've been going for over 25 years now, and this is just a little background if you're interested. Okay, and these are the QR codes if you're interested and need a one-stop shop. That's our website, our email, and our meetup code. And again, this will all be available when it comes out on the video tomorrow. And I do believe that's it. I am going to turn it over to Keith Wipke. Keith is with the National Renewable Energy Society, and I will let him take it from here. We greatly appreciate Keith taking his time on, in the evening to visit with us and talk about hydrogen from the NREL perspective. And Keith, if you'd like to do a brief intro for yourself and take the floor, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We're good, yeah.
Awesome. So I've got a slide for an intro here, but I'll just go ahead and get started. So let's see here. There we go. So I always like to let people know who I am. There's my contact info at the top. I've been at the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, for the last 30 years. I worked on gasoline hybrids for about 10 years before you could buy one. The little picture over on the right of the odometer is actually pretty out of date now. That's my second Prius from 2006 that has actually 240,000 miles on it now. And my daughter on the left in the picture below is actually driving that as her main car in Arizona. So I've been working on hybrids for 10 years. When I could actually buy one and stick it in the garage, I realized I wanted to work on the next thing. And so for me, that was hydrogen. So I managed the world's largest demonstration of hydrogen fuel cell cars and fueling stations. It was also called the Learning Demonstration, Hydrogen Learning Demonstration, or the National Learning Demonstration. There's a publication there if you want to see it. It's about 11 years old now. And then 11 years ago, I switched over to become the program manager at NREL for the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Technologies program. And I've got 3 daughters, all out of the house now, but really working to have a positive impact on the environment, because I realize that older generations often leave a bunch of turds for their kids, and I want to do everything I can to not make it too hard for them to have a nice planet to inherit. So you've probably heard a bunch about hydrogen recently. It's been in the news as kind of a topic of interest of this administration. Just in the last 2 months alone, NREL has been interviewed several times. On the left, you can see about a 3-minute piece on NBC News, and that's Jake Ward on the right and me on the left. It's a pretty good intro piece, I think, to hydrogen. And then Colorado Public Radio did a piece on May 18th that was also picked up by NPR a couple weeks later in a slightly shorter version. And I will send the PDF of this so that you guys can follow any of these links as we go forward. So the Biden administration has pretty aggressive decarbonization goals by 2035 to basically green up and get a carbon-free grid, and then 15 years later to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions for our whole energy system. And that includes transportation, buildings, industry, and agriculture. And environmental justice is very important to the administration, and in fact, 40% of the benefits of all the new funding is meant to benefit the environmental justice communities. So this is part of what we are doing at NREL, and it manifests itself in many ways, and I'll touch on some of those today. So if I had just one slide to give you tonight, this would be it. And this is our hydrogen at scale vision, and really our North Star, as it doesn't really change much. We've changed a few little pictures in the graphic, some colors, but otherwise it's basically stabilized into this image, which shows electricity inputs on the left, and then either going directly to hydrogen generation or going through the grid to hydrogen generation. Of course, you need water as input if you're doing electrolysis. And then once you have hydrogen, you can go back to the grid as you can with batteries. It's not recommended from an efficiency perspective to do that unless you really need that energy over a longer duration, really for long duration energy storage, because the round trip efficiency of going through hydrogen back to electricity is maybe 50%, and you can do much better than that with batteries or pumped hydro. But if you want to store, solar or wind for weeks to months, then hydrogen really becomes a good option. And then on the right side, we have a number of end uses. The three blue ones on the upper right are all transportation related, either directly in hydrogen vehicles, trucks, planes, ships, and so on, or you can combine with CO2 and make synthetic fuels like sustainable aviation fuel. You can upgrade oil with biomass and make basically gasoline or jet fuel, and this is really where most of the hydrogen goes today, along with ammonia for fertilizer in combining the hydrogen with nitrogen. And then new applications are metals production, so you don't have to use coal or coke, and making plastics and chemicals, and basically a lot of our industrial applications, you can replace some of those fossil fuels with hydrogen. You can also do combined heat and power. You can blend back in the natural gas grid. So a lot of versatility in having the energy stored as a molecule that you can actually move around and do things with. So for context, today, most of our hydrogen comes from natural gas, which of course is primarily CH4 or methane, and a process called steam methane reforming, where you basically combine water in the form of steam, pull off the hydrogen from the steam as well as the hydrogen from the carbon atom, and you make CO2. And so every year we make and use about 10 million metric tons of natural gas-based hydrogen. And some analysis we did for DOE showed that if we actually ramped up some of these end uses, we could grow that hydrogen use by up to maybe 5 times. And for reference, if we just took the two primary uses of hydrogen today for making oil into gasoline and diesel and jet fuel, and making hydrogen into ammonia for fertilizer, we took that natural gas-based hydrogen and replaced it with clean hydrogen, that would actually double today's solar or wind deployment. So just replacing today's applications with cleaner hydrogen would double our renewable power on the grid requirements. So imagine if we actually are successful in some of these other applications in growing the need for hydrogen, say by up to 5 times, then we're actually talking about 5 to 10 times the renewable power on the grid. So this is really going to draw a big need for renewables. So that brings us to the hydrogen shot. This was announced June 7th of 2021. And then there was a summit held later that year. This was announced by the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. And basically the target is to do $1 per kilogram in 1 decade. So 1, 1, 1. And so the baseline is about $5 to $6 per kilogram from electrolysis in 2021. 5 years later, an intermediate goal of $2 per kilogram, and then the ultimate goal of $1 per kilogram in 2031 or 10 years later. And just for reference, today's natural gas-based hydrogen is about $1.50 per kilogram for natural gas. So if you can meet this goal, you can actually undercut fossil or gray-based hydrogen. So really significant impact. Here's just some of the assumptions, and you can see that the major cost of that hydrogen is the electricity costs. And so even if we make the capital cost for the electrolyzers almost zero, we still have the energy costs. So we're really depending on folks like you and others in the industry to keep driving down the cost of electricity. In this case, 3 cents per kilowatt hour in 2025, 2 cents per kilowatt hour in 2030. And that is significant because if you actually put electricity out on the grid, you have to pay all the middlemen along the way. And so what we're hearing is some of the bigger hydrogen projects may have the renewables either behind the fence or on dedicated systems that they control themselves, so they don't have to pay the middlemen, basically vertically integrating that. And then last fall, the bipartisan infrastructure law, or bill, was passed, included large dollar figures for hydrogen, more than has ever been dedicated to hydrogen in this country before. And so it was $9.5 billion from the bill. That included $8 billion for regional hydrogen hubs, of which Colorado was one of a 4-state hub application, and then $1.5 billion for electrolysis and clean hydrogen manufacturing and recycling R&D. So while we were on a number of hydrogen hub proposals, really the larger role for us is in the R&D here out of this $1.5 billion. There's also been a national hydrogen strategy and roadmap released actually 2 weeks ago. Draft was released last fall. And then the icing on the cake here is the Inflation Reduction Act, which came out last, this was last August, I guess. And this was up to $3 per kilogram of hydrogen production tax credit if you can make ultra low carbon intensity hydrogen, so less than 0.45 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. And I've got another slide here that just shows, here's that 0.45 kilogram greenhouse gas intensity or lower. You can get credit for higher polluting hydrogen, but the credit goes down significantly. So I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware that there's kind of a debate going on in the hydrogen community right now, primarily environmentalists on one side and companies on the other side. And the reason why is while the tax credit was passed and signed into law last year, as with many tax credits, especially of this size, the Department of Treasury and IRS has to finalize the details of it because they're not, contained or really relevant for lawmakers to decide these details. So that's happening right now. I think it's actually supposed to come out in the next month or two, and so you'll see the articles from CPR and NPR actually touch on that a little bit. But the things that are being debated are what are the NRDC is calling the 3 pillars, which is new supply, also known as additionality. So in other words, this is saying if you want to make hydrogen from solar, you actually have to add new solar onto the grid to be able to use that solar. You can't pillage the solar that's already on the grid, because basically what that means was if you take that solar, whoever was going to be using that solar or could have used that solar is now going to be using fossil fuels until more solar is actually added to the grid. So that's the new supply or additionality concept. Deliverability is basically saying that there has to be some sort of physical connection between the production of electricity and the consumption of electricity. In other words, you can't be having wind turbines put on the island of Hawaii, in Hawaii, and then say you're going to use that electricity in California to make hydrogen, because there's no physical connection. And so it's maybe theoretically a balancing act, but you're actually not using that electricity, and you never could. And then hourly matching is perhaps the most contentious topic, which is saying that if I want to make clean hydrogen from renewables this afternoon, the sun has to be shining or the wind has to be blowing with renewables that I have added or allocated to myself on the grid, and that has to happen on an hourly basis. So not good enough to just say I'm going to make a bunch of solar in the summer and then use it later when the sun isn't shining in December, because the reality is the grid does not store electricity, or at least not very much. So the reality of that is that if you're turning your electrolyzer on 24 hours a day in December, you're most likely burning more fossil fuels, and that a lot of the solar maybe that was added for you in the summer was actually being curtailed and spilled because it wasn't needed at the time. So those are really 3 of the main topics. There's links here. You can read the NRDC article on the left, and on the right is a letter from a number of companies and trade organizations to the Department of Treasury, the White House, and DOE stating their points. So just wanted to bring that up because that's a very active point of discussion in the hydrogen community today. So focusing a little bit more now onto NREL and our role in this hydrogen ecosystem. We boiled down our research into 4 main areas and 4 simple words: make, move, store, and use. And really the move and store are also considered the connective tissue between the production and the end use. Our foundation and our basis is really on advanced hydrogen production technologies. We have quite a bit of activity in infrastructure research and large-scale demonstration. I'll show a lot of pictures on that. And then we did have hydrogen storage materials research. We still have that, but we're actually moving into larger scale hydrogen systems demonstration and research as well. And then finally on the end use, we have been focused for over a decade on hydrogen fuel cells for cars, light-duty cars. We're now focusing more on the heavy-duty transportation sector. So imagine medium and heavy-duty trucks, 18-wheelers, 80,000 pounds, and so on, because those are very hard to decarbonize with batteries, for example. And then finally, just looking for expanding green hydrogen into other new end use cases, as I mentioned on the right side of that hydrogen at scale vision. And really, we're focused on accelerating the progress and impact. I feel like hydrogen has now turned a corner, and it is inevitable to some degree that it will be scaled up. It's a question of how quickly and how do we maximize the impact on our climate from that. I'm going to talk a lot about our Department of Energy programs, our projects, but I first wanted to acknowledge that we are also very active with the private sector. And you can see this is a growing area with our funding doubling from fiscal year 20 to 21, about 35 new partnerships last year, and over $7 million in cash to NREL. And for context, our DOE program is about $30 million a year. So this is getting up at about 20 to 25% of our research is now privately funded and kind of taking advantage and leveraging all the investment made by the Department of Energy over the last decade plus. Here's a couple major agreements that were in the news last year. Fortescue Future Industries, which is actually locating their headquarters in Colorado, committed to $80 million over 10 years, and Electric Hydrogen has an active partnership for $3.6 million over 3 years. So since I can't give you a tour of our lab right now, just a few photos, and this are catchphrases from powders to power, really spanning on the left side, more fundamental science and understanding of materials and their electrochemical interactions, all the way over to the right side. We're actually doing megawatt scale demonstration and research activities. But in the spectrum on the left, we can actually make our own catalysts and membranes. We can characterize them at the size of a pencil eraser head, actually spray our own membrane electrode assemblies. We can scale those up with a roll-to-roll pilot manufacturing system, and we can do single cell as well as short stack testing and evaluate the quality of those materials that were made, and then finally demonstrate it at a megawatt scale. And we really use a lot of analysis to guide our research, because it really tells us where we need to cut costs and where performance and improvements could be made. I just have one more detailed slide here on advanced production technology, since it is so core to our research at NREL and the hydrogen energy earshot goal of $1 per kilogram in a decade. And you know, wind and solar took about 40 years to get cost competitive. Now they're cheaper than the alternatives, and we really need to do that for green hydrogen, not in 40 years, but in the next 5 to 10. So we're really trying to, in everything we do, accelerate the rate of innovation and development, and working with our private sector partners to help them get to market with better products sooner. But on the near-term focus on electrolysis, we're really shooting toward $100 per kilowatt electrolyzer stack goal in just 5 years. There's been a consortium that NREL leads called H2New, hydrogen next generation electrolysis of water is what that stands for, and it includes both PEM and alkaline electrolysis. And then longer term, we have a consortium called the Hydrogen Consortium, which looks at other technologies such as photoelectrochemical or PEC, direct water splitting, solar thermochemical, and high temperature electrolysis as well. One thing that kind of relates to the question of how you operate your electrolyzer, and back to the debate around 24/7 operation of electrolysis versus only using it when renewable power is available and dedicated to that electrolyzer. And this graph kind of shows what's going on there. On the vertical axis here, we have hydrogen levelized cost in dollars per kilogram, where the top black curve is the net cost of that hydrogen over each hour of the year, depending on how much of the year you operate it. So for example, if you only operated your electrolyzer 1,000 hours out of the year, it would be, maybe $2.50 a kilogram. If you said, you know what, I really want to only use this free electricity that otherwise would be curtailed, so I don't want to go above, say, 500 hours, all of a sudden your cost shoots up to $4 to $5 per kilogram. The reason why is obviously you're spreading the cost of that hydrogen over, or the capital costs over the amount of hydrogen you make. And if you're not making as much hydrogen because it's not operating as much, you're basically using that expensive hardware a lot less. The bottom graph basically shows another take on that, where you've got three curves, and the three curves represent reducing the capital cost from about $900 per kilowatt down to about $100 per kilowatt. So high capital cost of electrolyzers here in orange, low capital cost in black. And the goal of this is that if you can make the electrolyzers cheap enough, you see how flat this bathtub curve is, where you can basically operate, say, from about 2,000 hours all the way up to 8,000 hours, and your change in the cost of hydrogen is very small, like 10 to 20 cents per kilogram. Whereas if you have an expensive electrolyzer, you're really driven toward this right side to get down even to $2.75, because your electrolyzer is so expensive, you've got to operate it all the time to spread the cost of that equipment out over a larger quantity of hydrogen. So this relates back to the debate over time matching of when you use your electrolyzer to when renewables are available, because it means that basically you're not going to operate your electrolyzer all the time, which pushes you to the left side of this curve, which really drives you toward getting that cost of electrolyzers down as cheap as you can, which is where NREL comes in and part of our goals of our research. We collaborate with a number of other national labs. I just mentioned the Hydrogen Consortium and H2New. We also have HIMARC on hydrogen storage, Million Mile Fuel Cell Truck on the fuel cell area. We have a bio consortium. There's a High Blend consortium on blending hydrogen in with natural gas. So we collaborate wherever possible with other national labs. We are forced to compete sometimes, and when we are, we do compete, and we do pretty well. So moving on to kind of our spectrum of electrolysis research, really driving down the costs. That for us is happening mostly at the single cell, where we're trying to optimize the materials, thrift iridium, which is more expensive than platinum, get those out of the cells as much as possible, although there's very few good alternatives so far. We scale those up into short stacks, and then we have this thing we call translational R&D, where as we scale up, we try to feed the lessons learned that come from system operation and durability back into the smaller scale research. And then finally, we do megawatt scale stack, and megawatt scale system research, and I'll talk quite a bit about that now. But you might wonder, why does a national lab and kind of a research lab that has a lot of detailed fundamental science, why are we doing large scale research and demonstration? And the main reason is to de-risk these systems. Utilities and others don't really have the capabilities to do the type of safe, controlled research at a megawatt scale that we do. And so we're basically, our focus is to do that research for them, take some of the risk out of it, provide data, work out some of the bugs, in particular the integration with wind and solar, how to operate these systems, how well they turn down, ramp up, shut off, come back online, and so on. So essentially, if we can do research at the 1 to 5 megawatt scale, and then others can scale up to hundreds of megawatts, they will have a better chance of success based on what we learn from the smaller scale. And our Flatirons campus now has this capability, and I'll show a couple slides on that now. So before I show the photos, I just show this 3D block diagram to make it really simple. It's essentially a horseshoe-shaped flow where we take in AC from our grid, our renewables on site at the Flatirons campus just south of Boulder, and we rectify that into DC, put it into a 1.25 megawatt NREL electrolyzer. This can be doubled up to 2.5 if we bought another stack. It has all the balance of plant for 2.5 megawatts. We then take the hydrogen, run it through a hydrogen compressor, store it about 3,000 psi. That stores about 600 kilograms of hydrogen, and just for reference, 1 kilogram of hydrogen is about a gallon of gasoline equivalent, for 34 kilowatt hours of chemical energy. And then we can run that back through a fuel cell and invert that DC into AC and put it back out onto the grid, and maybe even flow into your house in Boulder or further. And so this is kind of an electrons to electrons flow. It is, as I mentioned, not the most efficient pathway if you want to store electricity for the short term, but it's really good for not only long duration energy storage, but if you stop short here and don't put the hydrogen back into the stationary fuel cell, but rather put it off into a truck, a bus, a train, make ammonia or green steel with it, you can really use the power of that molecule for its additional capability rather than just the electrical value of it. Here's a photo just showing that we're actually, we've got the hardware in place. The electrolyzer is now running. We are in the process of bringing our compressor and storage system online this next month, and the fuel cell is likely to be commissioned in August. But everything is actually all hooked up and been checked out from a safety perspective. I like this photo because it shows one of many PV fields in the background. Also shows the stub of a megawatt scale wind turbine. There's multiples of those on the site, and then all these other things in the sandbox of the integrated system, like batteries and inverters, real-time digital simulation, and so on. And this construction site here behind the PV is actually a 20 megawatt controllable grid interface. Right now we only have a 7 megawatt, so this will bring us up about 3 times bigger, up to 20 megawatts. And this allows us to do things that you wouldn't want to do to a cell's utility grid. For example, change the frequency or amplitude of these sine waves on the grid. We can do that and see where the systems trip offline. We can do black starts. We can do other things like that. So pretty safe environment for doing the research that we want to do. Here's a photo from the top of a wind turbine, the same system actually before the fuel cell was delivered and before the compressor was delivered, but just to give you a sense of the scale of these 6 pads, and also that we are actually expanding our footprint to where these 2 red rectangles are, and I've got a slide showing that right after this one. So this just shows some of the other technologies on pads 1 through 5. we're basically on pad 6 here, plus all this other stuff is sitting over on the gravel. And then over right off the screen here is where we're going to be expanding from 1.25 megawatt up to 5 to 6 and on to 10 megawatts. This just shows the location of that pad 6 plus, and we are going to have some trenching here, have a much larger pad as well as gravel, and this will be right next to a heavy-duty truck charging system, and we're actually intending on eventually being able to fuel heavy-duty trucks at this location as well. Here's a little bit more detail. It's probably too small for you to read, but it's a 30 by 120 foot concrete pad, heavy-duty, where it can actually withstand the vibrations of a big hydrogen compressor that could do, say, 10 kilograms a minute compression. Places for different stacks and systems and balance of plant, a lot of power electronics, cooling, water deionized system. And basically, we will be able to either take a 10 megawatt full delivered system, we can do a 6 megawatt partial system in various configurations. So 6 1 megawatt systems, or 1 6 megawatt, or 2 3s, or 3 2s, and so on, by having a flexible electrical bus. And then we've got a core balance of plant that we can actually just surround a PEM stack up to 6 megawatts, or an alkaline electrolyzer stack at 2 megawatts. So there's some other details here on the left, but this is an $18 million project that was just approved last month. It will take us about 3 years to purchase and commission and install all this hardware, but it will really give us extraordinary capability to go up to 10 megawatts in electrolysis at our Flatirons campus. And then beyond that, I mentioned a few of these already, but we're looking to do heavy-duty vehicle fueling, large-scale storage technologies. We're targeting like 10 metric tons or 10,000 kilograms, likely underground in engineered systems, potentially liquid hydrogen systems. There's a big need for this from the private sector. And then hydrogen power systems in general, like fuel cells, turbines, reciprocating engines, and so on. Natural gas blending with hydrogen, and then what we call electrons to molecules, or molecule building, where we can actually make ammonia, green steel, and so on. And then finally, really a focus on greater integration of hydrogen technologies more directly with the renewables. So I want to introduce a concept we call ARES, Advanced Research for Integrated Energy Systems at Scale. And we refer to it as ARES because it's just easier to do that. But really what it means is that we're connecting all these technologies together and really focusing our research up at the Flatirons campus and at ESIF on the integration. So you can see a few of the assets here, a 2.5 megawatt dynamometer, a 5 megawatt dynamometer. These are for wind turbines. The 20 megawatt controllable grid interface that's being commissioned now, the existing 7 megawatt, batteries, inverters, load banks, PV arrays, and of course, hydrogen is the most recent addition here. So this just shows how hydrogen is now at a megawatt scale in the sandbox with all these other technologies. And then I want to give 2 examples of some ARES projects. One is a integration of wind to hydrogen and then on to green steel or ammonia. And this slide focuses on just the hydrogen part of that. But we basically looked at 4 places in the US with different attributes of storage, underground storage with salt caverns, water scarcity, solar and wind potential, demand for syn fuels and metals, demand for ammonia production, and so on. So each of these 4 kind of has a different combination of those. And if we just look at one of those, which is Texas, Lubbock, Texas, really good wind resource down there. And so what we did is we analyzed what's the cost of steam methane reformed hydrogen, about $1.30 or $1.40 a kilogram. And then if we did carbon capture and sequestration, it raises the cost a little bit. If we just used the grid, then the cost goes way up. This is kind of this $5 to $6 per kilogram today. And then as we start doing things like saying we're only going to use the grid plus wind, or the grid plus wind and PV, or wind only with a centralized electrolysis system, or wind plus PV and batteries, or wind only with distributed electrolysis, you can see the cost kind of come down. There's still about $3, $2.50 to $3 a kilogram, but what these arrows indicate are the tax incentives, and not just from the IRA, that's the biggest one, but also from other incentives for wind and solar. But what you can see here is if you do the grid and wind plus PV or wind only, you can actually get to zero or negative cost for hydrogen. In other words, the incentives are big enough that you're essentially paid to make the hydrogen, which you then, of course, sell and make a profit on. So really good situation to accelerate and scale up hydrogen where there's good resources and a good off-taker or end user of that hydrogen. Another example I wanted to show is an ARES project at Borrego Springs in California. This is in collaboration with San Diego Gas and Electric, as well as Southern California Gas. And this basically shows the grid part of that Borrego Springs system. It's about a 20 megawatt load. They have, I think, 37 megawatts of solar, or this actually maybe says 26 megawatts, but I think it peaks higher than that. And so they're curtailing solar all the time, but they don't have enough storage here. And so they also are at the end of a long transmission line that's subject to weather disruptions and outages, sometimes several days. So they have 3.6 megawatts of diesel generators that basically can start up and give the sine wave to the rest of the system so that the PV and the batteries can be added onto the grid. And so what this project is about is actually looking at doing an advanced inverter with grid forming capability so that we can actually use the hydrogen assets, in particular a small fuel cell, to help start the grid and be that orchestra conductor of the sine wave for all the other assets on the grid. And I should mention this is a severely disadvantaged community, an economically distressed area, and it's basically some golf courses and hot springs, and then a number of trailers that people live in. So this, we don't want to make the air quality worse for them. They really want to get rid of these diesel generators, and so hydrogen is a good option for cleaning up and giving them a more resilient grid. I won't go through these in detail, but there's a number of other areas, research projects underway. Just focus on this one with GKN and Southern California Gas. On this next slide, basically we're going to be storing hydrogen in the form of metal hydrides in these two 20-foot ISO containers, and then we have a thermal management ISO container in the back here in green. But this will store 520 kilograms of hydrogen at low pressure, about 300 or 400 psi. Coincidentally, that's the output pressure from the electrolyzers, so you can actually get rid of the need for that hydrogen compressor, which is a capital cost, but also a maintenance headache, as they tend to have a lot of parts that wear out and require servicing. So moving from our Flatirons campus down to Golden, this is kind of an overview of our the north end of our ESIF building and a bunch of the infrastructure research out on the pad, light duty fueling on the left. This is no longer future, this is current. Heavy duty fueling on the right, and then all of our compression and storage in the center. So this is what it looked like in early 2020. You can see it was really focused around the light duty fueling on the left. There's a fuel cell Hyundai vehicle, and all the right side was all just gravel. Well, during COVID, with social distancing and masks and shutdowns and all that, we were actually able to expand the pad, repipe our system so we could do high flow, add this heavy duty fueling capability on the right. Here you can see 9 carbon fiber tanks in this rack. That simulates a heavy duty truck that can store over 80 kilograms of hydrogen, enough to take an 18-wheeler with 80,000 pounds, about 500 or 600 miles. And so this is a close-up of the vehicle simulator, the truck simulator, the 9 carbon fiber tanks. And we're super proud that last October, right in the beginning of this fiscal year, we did an over 80 kilogram fill of these tanks in 6.5 minutes with mass flow rates of 12.5 kilograms per minute on average, and up to a peak of 23 kilograms per minute. And if you if that doesn't mean much to you, I'll put it in terms of battery electric charging. Flowing hydrogen, 1 kilogram per minute of hydrogen is equivalent to the energy of 2 megawatts. So this 12.6 kilogram per minute average flow rate is really like over 20 megawatts average and over 40 megawatts peak. This is really the reason why the trucking companies like hydrogen, because it gives them more of a diesel-like refueling rate and long-range driving. These are some of the technical details showing how we did that. Basically, we filled from a medium pressure tank and then cycled between a number of high pressure tanks. So these are the station side in blue, and then the truck in these curves that are kind of gradually increasing and get to a full state in just 6.5 minutes. I've got just a couple more slides and then we'll open it up to questions. This is one of our electrons to molecules activities. This is at in our Golden site. And this bioreactor here, in particular this tall silver tank, lets us convert hydrogen from renewables plus CO2 from some waste stream into methane. And the magic is that there are microorganisms, biological organisms in this bioreactor that basically ingest the CO2 and hydrogen and breathe out methane, or CH4. So this is essentially making renewable natural gas from a CO2 waste stream and hydrogen. So this project was sponsored by Southern California Gas, who really wanted to look into how to make renewable natural gas out of renewables, and also then was sponsored by the Solar Office, the Hydrogen Office, and the Bioenergy Technologies Office. And then I will, this is my last slide, just give a little bit of a glimpse into some of the expansion into other end uses of hydrogen. We have a project with the Federal Aviation Administration to do a study of hydrogen infrastructure research for the whole ecosystem around airports. So this means not just the plane itself, but the shuttles that carry people to and from rental cars, the baggage tugs, the things that push the planes back. There's a lot of things running around the airport that you see a lot of vehicles, as well as a lot of stationary power being consumed before the airplane even gets pushed back from the tarmac. And so we've done a number of analyses there, estimating the demand from the aircraft, estimating the demand from the airport infrastructure, and then also looking at safety setbacks and other things. And so this is an active area of research, and I believe Airbus said they were going to have a number of announcements this week at the Paris Air Show. I haven't seen headlines on that yet, but I've been keeping my eye open for it. And with that, I will stop and we can open it up to any questions. I'm going to stop my screen show here.
Thank you, Keith. This is an excellent deep dive. Wonderful. We've got a couple of questions here. Also, I just want to reiterate that I will be sending out a link to this presentation tomorrow. And Keith, I will send you a copy of the questions that came in as well. There was an
Okay.
inquiry by John Finley, that he wanted to reach out and contact you. So I'm going to make sure that you get his information.
Okay.
We've got a question here about what is the environmental advantage of making carbon-containing synthetic fuels?
So the advantage is that you can use today's aircraft or slightly modified aircraft that burn hydrocarbon fuel, Jet A specifically. So you can actually make a sustainable aviation fuel or a jet fuel replacement from hydrogen and CO2 or biomass with hydrogen. And so while you still do emit CO2 when you burn the hydrogen, when the plane is in flight, if that carbon came from a renewable source, as long as the efficiencies along the way aren't too bad, then you're effectively net zero or close to net zero. So it allows us to have a longer runway, so to speak, for sustainable aviation to become sustainable without having to have fuel cell planes right away.
All right. There was also a question that came in about tours at NREL. Do you want to talk a little bit about what NREL does for in-person tours?
Yeah, so I mean, in general, we're a research lab, so we try to focus on our research, but we do end up doing quite a bit of tours for VIPs or business development where companies want to come in and use our capability or do collaborative research with us. And so before they decide whether they want to do collaborative research, they need to see what our capabilities are. NREL does have general tours. Often Jim Bosch runs those tours. I think on our website, they're every maybe 2 weeks or something if you as the public want to come in. In general, we don't do detailed research tours, in hydrogen area for the public unless there's an open house or something like that.
All right, thanks. Moving on here. Question, what is the environmental advantage of making methane from hydrogen and CO2? When you use this in an internal combustion engine, you will get CO2 as an output. So no net reduction in the delivery of CO2 to the atmosphere. I think.
Right, so there's pretty much the same argument about sustainable aviation fuel. It's a hydrocarbon fuel, in this case methane versus a longer chain molecule that's a liquid. But the concept is the same. You are making a fuel that you already have the infrastructure for that you can use today, in this case natural gas, but you're making it in a way that uses renewables. So kind of a net zero. There are, if you're actually taking off biogas, say from a landfill that otherwise would be released as methane, which obviously is really bad for the environment because you have potent greenhouse gas going up in the atmosphere. So if you're actually taking that biogas away and then converting it into a useful fuel, it's actually a net negative, negative greenhouse gas impact because it's you're taking something that otherwise would be released and you're actually converting it into a fuel.
All right, another question here. What are the safety concerns regarding hydrogen-powered transportation and how are they addressed?
Yeah, so I've got three girls I showed in my second slide. I've taken them around in the hydrogen fuel cell cars. I feel incredibly safe in those vehicles. They were engineered by the auto companies for ultra safe operation, even in the case of an accident. The hydrogen tanks are built to withstand very high pressure, 10,000 psi or 700 times atmospheric pressure. And that's just because to get enough hydrogen in a small space on a car, you have to compress it quite a bit. And so as a result, they end up with, say, 3/4 to an inch of carbon fiber wrapped vessels. So they're super duper strong. And just, to picture how strong they are, 10,000 pounds per square inch means taking basically an F-150 or something close to 10,000 pounds loaded and putting that on a square inch. Like that's how much force those tanks can withstand on a regular basis. So incredibly strong, really the last thing to be damaged in an accident, especially where they place them, same place we place a gas tank kind of in the rear underneath the seat typically.
All right. Since the IRA incentives are linked to renewables and your Flatiron demo uses PEM electrolysis, why is the NREL research funding alkaline electrolyzer development?
Not sure the nature of that question. So there's basically different electrolyzer technologies. The oldest one is alkaline, liquid alkaline systems. Those are commercial today. You've heard of the process to make chlorine, which is obviously used in bleach and sanitizing our water and all kinds of other industrial applications. It's called a chlor-alkali process, and actually generates hydrogen as a byproduct of that process. That was really the foundation. Those are alkaline systems. That was the foundation for the early electrolyzers, including the electrolyzers that are on spacecraft and submarines and elsewhere. So they're older technology. They're not as compact as PEM technology and not really as suitable for ramping up and down. So the PEM technology electrolyzers are really based on the fuel cell PEM technologies that were designed obviously to have a car accelerate and stop and shut off and so on. So well suited for following a variable profile from renewables. We're also working on another technology called anion exchange membrane. So kind of trying to take the best of both worlds, kind of having an alkaline membrane, but still not having liquid alkaline being circulated around. So they're all water electrolyzers. There's also high temperature electrolyzers I didn't really talk about. Our sister lab in Idaho National Laboratory is actually focused on the high temperature electrolyzers because they couple very well with nuclear levels of heat, high temperature.
All right. It looks like this question that I've got here is kind of a little doozy. Let me read it out to you. See how it goes. Bob Evans, retired NREL scientist, has written on hydrogen from biomass, possibly because most biochar researchers focus on the carbon and want as little hydrogen in their biochar as possible. Adding biomass as a source can get the hydrogen program into carbon dioxide removal, CDR. Is there any other way?
Is there any other way? I'm not sure any other way to do what, but I do know that, for example, in steel making, carbon is part of the process to pull the oxygen out of the iron ore. You can replace that carbon with biomass, so you're not using coal or coke. You can actually use this biochar as a substitute for that. But I'm not sure I understood the question.
Ron, if you're still here, do you want to pop another question in there that's a little more concise for Keith, and we can put it out to him? If so, need to do it pretty quick here because there's no more questions. Actually, while we're waiting to see if there's a little more feedback, there was a little discussion, Keith, earlier this week about the green versus gray hydrogen. Did you want to just talk about that a little bit? It's something that I think folks, it sounds like a topic that people are rather interested in. So do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's these colors of the rainbow that have been
Right.
assigned to various feedstocks, and the Department of Energy is trying to get away from these colors because they overly simplify and can obfuscate the actual carbon emissions, because nuclear or pink hydrogen is not necessarily the same if it's a 1 gigawatt reactor versus a small modular reactor that's located closer to the end use. Gray hydrogen is assigned typically to natural gas, but what if that natural gas is actually coming from a renewable source? What color do you call it? So basically, they're going to a more objective measure or metric of the carbon intensity in this kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. So in the IRA incentive that I mentioned, it's got to be less than 0.45 kilograms of CO2 equivalent or greenhouse gas equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen. So that removes any uncertainty about what you're calling something. It's just fact-based, it's a pathway calculation, and it's like the arguments that happened a number of years ago on ethanol and what is the real environmental benefit or impact of blending, say, 10% ethanol into our gasoline system. And if you, depending on where you draw the box, you can have a better or worse impact on the environment. And if you draw the box on our world, which is really where we're going with CO2, and there's crops in the United States are being grown specifically for ethanol, which means that other crops aren't grown, and so they're burning rainforests in somewhere else to plant these crops that we're no longer planting because they're not as profitable. Burning rainforests obviously is not good for the environment or greenhouse gas emissions. So depending on how you draw the box, can really have a big impact on the climate impact. And so I think when you get to a carbon impact of something objectively calculated using the GREET model that is highly accepted across the world, I think you kind of get rid of a lot of the discussion about what's behind the curtain, and you basically pull the curtain back and you do the calculations.
Okay, thanks for tackling that rather tough gray area, if you will. I did get a little bit of feedback from Ron. It says he was saying way, meaning is there a way, meaning negative or removal, not carbon neutral, as in burning of fuel. Does that make a little more sense?
Yeah, but I'm not sure what the end use application is, but certainly, for example, making cement or concrete is a very energy intensive pathway or application, and they're looking at how you actually could capture CO2 from the atmosphere, so a negative CO2 impact, and then rather than pumping it down in the ground somewhere and hoping it stays for a while, actually locking it up in various molecular forms inside concrete to provide maybe better structural characteristics, as well as you're basically putting that carbon into a building, right? And so we grow a lot of trees for lumber, make 2x4s out of them, build houses. That's great. Those houses probably last 100 years, and that helps pull carbon from the atmosphere. But all the concrete for the foundation probably negates that impact because it's so energy intensive. So yeah, we're definitely looking at carbon capture, direct conversion of CO2 into other kind of chemical precursors. It's an active area of research. It's also a very young area of research, not mature like some of the fuel cell technology is.
Okay, Ron says he's going to give you a call.
Okay.
And the questions are rolling in a little bit. Let's like keep moving. You got a few more minutes there, Keith?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, awesome. Do you see any hydrogen technology ever improving building heating and cooling systems other than electricity?
Not sure the nature of that question, but I mean, we do. So in Japan, they were kind of the innovators of tankless hot water heaters. It took about 20 years for those to come over here to this country. I've got one in my basement. I love it. When I'm gone for 2 weeks, I'm not burning any natural gas, keeping a tank of water hot for when I might come back. They also have kind of pioneered small 1 to 5 kilowatt fuel cell systems that are essentially, think of them as hot water heaters for your house that also make electricity while they are making the hot water. So super high efficiency, like in the high 90s, because you're generating electricity and you're using all the waste heat. So that's one application that could make sense for buildings. There are larger fuel cell systems that could be doing combined heat and power at a larger scale. Relative to the HVAC, the temperature of the waste heat from fuel cells is not great. It's like 60 degrees C maybe, or 70 degrees C. It's not really as high as you might want to drive some thermally driven cooling cycles, for example.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder, I'll send you all this Q&A information, Keith. And if there was a little more information that you wanted to pass along, or if you can connect with a gentleman that wanted to connect with you, that'd be great, because I believe that all the emails and so forth are included in there. And your information is included in the slide presentation, which will be in the video. And I think, if you can send me along your slides as a PDF, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Be glad to send that out to everyone. There's a miscellaneous question or two. All right, Ron, we're going to give you one more go here, and then we might let Keith go here. But good question here. More use of hydrogen from syngas means more CDR from the biochar. Think it could be low cost since the syngas now is being flared. Does that work for you, Keith?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm not an expert in biochar or really the syngas, other than the one project that we have going on at NREL. But we do have a big biomass and bioenergy technology group. They're really focused on SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, right now. But a lot of them had a history in biomass and gasification and pyrolysis and all those things. So maybe I can get you hooked up with the right person who would speak your language a little bit better than I do.
Well, that works. And I'll get you all this information tomorrow, Keith, when I send out the link to the presentation. Any slides you can get me in a PDF would be great. I believe that kind of wraps up most of our questions that came in. And it's been a really informational, very, very interesting presentation. Thank you so much again for doing this. I know you did this with the NREL group, I believe, 3 years ago, you said?
Yeah, sometime during COVID, I remember, maybe a year or two ago, yeah.
Okay, well, we greatly appreciate you coming back in, and we had a lively crowd of well over 20 people. We hit 41 folks. I don't know where they all came from, but glad they all attended. And
Yeah.
I will get you the information, from the Q&A, and if you're able to reach out to folks with any additional information, we appreciate it. And
Awesome.
with that, I think we're gonna cut you loose, let you go.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith.
Have a good evening.
You too.